There are places on this earth that are never marked on a map. No signposts, no official name. But the moment someone mentions them, voices drop instantly, like people are afraid of waking something that is still asleep. These are lands people did not abandon because there was no water or no road. They left because they witnessed or heard told too many deaths with no explanation. Deaths that arrived quietly. No traces, no witnesses. Whoever went in never came back. And over time, that fear stopped being rumor and became an unwritten law. Do not go near that place if you want to stay alive. The most terrifying thing is not death. It is how people slowly learn to accept it as a natural part of the world. When injustice repeats for long enough and no one has the power to face it, it does not only kill people. It erodes faith in a sacred order. People start believing there are lands that do not belong to justice, that there are forces no one can touch. And when that belief takes root, evil no longer needs to hide. It stands out in the open, confident, because it knows no one dares to name it. It is in that atmosphere that a group stopped in the middle of a deserted valley. Not because they were lost, not because they were exhausted. They stopped because they had reached the boundary between the familiar human world and an unseen realm generations before them only dared to whisper about. There was a well there. On the surface, it looked like thousands of other wells in the desert. But for 1,000 years, no one dared to draw a single bucket from it, not because the water was poisoned, but because whatever lived beneath it had turned that place into a territory of horror. The stories sounded like legends, but the evidence was real. Soldiers who had fallen there, groups that vanished without a single scream. Fear spread so far that even the strongest chose to turn away, convinced there was an evil beyond anything human beings could confront. And when that fear became collective, it created a dangerous vacuum, a vacuum where evil was allowed to exist without being challenged. This is not only a story about unseen beings, it is the timeless story of humanity. Every era has its own well. Places where the weak are slaughtered, where violence repeats, where people whisper, no one can do anything about it. And that sentence is what feeds evil longer than any strength ever could. Because when people stop believing in the possibility of justice, evil does not have to fight anymore. It only has to wait. If you are still listening, pause for a moment. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained. This is not a place for entertainment stories. These stories are told to wake up what fear has trained people to forget. No land lies beyond justice, and no force can survive if it depends only on human silence. But right there, in the place where everyone believed no one would ever act, a chilling question was raised. Not a question of strength, but of responsibility. If evil is killing people day after day, if fear has become law, then who is supposed to break that law? Who has the authority to step into a place where neither people nor prayers ever return? And more than that, what happens when justice finally decides it will not stand outside anymore? This story does not begin with swords, and it does not begin with victory. It begins with a frightening realization. If no one confronts the darkness will swallow everything. And sometimes the greatest test is not the enemy. It is having the courage to admit our silence has lasted far too long. If you feel your curiosity growing, if you want to know what happens when justice finally stands before that cursed well, stay with us until the very end. And if you value spiritual history told with depth and truth, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us so we can keep bringing you the next videos. What is waiting ahead is not only a confrontation, it is the answer to the question, what really happens when evil is forced, for the first time, to face justice? There is a truth very few people dare to say plainly. Having strength does not automatically give you the right to use it. In history, most tragedies were not born from the weak, but from those who believed that being strong was enough to justify anything. That is why the order of the world is not protected by raw strength, but by authority that comes with responsibility. And when that authority is placed in the wrong hands, or used at the wrong moment, it becomes a source of chaos instead of justice. In that kind of moment, the decision cannot be emotional. Not everyone who is brave can walk into a place where darkness reigns. Not everyone willing to sacrifice is qualified to represent justice. Because if action rises from personal will, then even when the goal looks righteous, the outcome can still become disaster. What is needed is not a hero chasing glory, but someone willing to carry the consequences of the authority entrusted to him. This is where the line between strength and authority becomes clear. Strength can force others to submit for a moment, but only legitimate authority can restore lasting order. And that authority does not come from fame, it does not come from bloodline, and it does not come from public applause. It comes from trust, from being appointed by an authority higher than human beings. When someone is chosen, it does not mean they are being favored. It means they are being burdened with heavier responsibility than anyone else. The person entrusted with that mission does not step forward like a conqueror. Deep down, he steps forward as someone who knows every step he takes will open or close a door for countless lives. If he acts correctly, justice is restored. If he acts wrongly, the price will not be personal failure alone, but damage to a sacred order itself. That awareness makes authority heavy, not sweet the way power-hungry people imagine. In that moment, what matters is no longer who is stronger. It is who is worthy to stand as the voice of justice. Because justice does not accept hands shaking with hatred, and it does not accept hearts led by ego. It demands steadiness, self-control, and the ability to put duty above self. The one chosen must not act to prove who he is. He must act because what must be done no matter the cost. Authority like that does not set a person free, it binds him to responsibility. The more he is given, the less he is allowed to be wrong. The higher he stands, the less he is allowed to let personal emotion steer the decision. That is why being chosen is not a reward. It is a severe test. Pass it, and order is restored. Fail it, and the consequences spread farther than any failure an ordinary person could ever cause. Here the story is no longer about the courage to enter darkness. It is about humility while holding authority. The one entrusted understands he is not the center of the story. He is only a means through which something greater is carried out, and when a person accepts that role, he gives up the right to act on preference and chooses to act by responsibility. That surrender is the sign of real authority. History has proven that self-proclaimed saviors often leave the most ruin behind. Those truly entrusted with a mission usually walk in silence, carrying a weight few people understand. They do not chase recognition because they know justice does not need applause to exist. It only needs to be done at the right time, in the right way, by the right person. And in that moment, when the decision is made not by ambition but by responsibility, the wheel of history begins to turn. Not loudly, not for show, but with a weight heavy enough to change the fate of lands abandoned to darkness for generations. What happens next will not be about who defeats whom. It will be about how authority, when placed where it belongs, can bring order back to the places where fear once ruled for ages. There is an unwritten rule in every true system of justice. Before strength is used, truth must be spoken. If justice rushes to punish without opening a path to turn back, it will soon be mistaken for violence. And if strength is unleashed without moral limits, it will stop protecting people and become a new fear replacing the old one. That is why, in a sacred order, confrontation does not begin with swords. It begins with an invitation. That invitation does not sound like begging, and it does not resemble compromise. It comes from the firmness of truth. When truth is presented fully, the one facing it can no longer claim they did not know, they were not warned, or they had no choice. That is the moment justice hands them the power to decide their own fate, and that power of choice makes everything that follows fair because no one is pushed into a dead end from the start. But an invitation, even with moral weight, is not always accepted. Some have lived in violence so long they confuse it with authority. To them, yielding means weakness, and peace is just another name for defeat. When they face truth, they mock it. When they are offered a chance, they treat it with contempt. That is where justice moves to the second step, warning. A warning is not a threat. It is a boundary drawn clearly. It says the road ahead has been shown, but if you keep walking the other way, the consequences will no longer be surprising. A warning places responsibility entirely in the hands of the stubborn. From that moment on, no one can say they were treated unfairly because they were shown the end of the path they insisted on taking. There is a painful truth we cannot deny. Not every evil can be persuaded. Some are not blind from ignorance but from pride. They do not reject truth because they cannot see it. They reject it because they refuse to bow before anything higher than themselves. When that pride reaches its peak, the invitation becomes meaningless, and the warning is dismissed as empty intimidation. And that is when justice is forced to take the final step. Punishment in this order is not a burst of anger. It is the cold duty of responsibility. It does not rise from hatred, and it is not meant to satisfy the emotion of winning. It exists to end a cycle of crime that has gone beyond what society can endure. When every door to peace has been slammed shut by the evildoer himself, refusing to act becomes the greatest injustice toward the innocent. In that moment, strength is not used to show off. It is used to restore order. Every action carries a clear message. Violence is not the first language of justice, but it will be the last language if every other language is rejected. And walking through all three steps is exactly what makes punishment, however severe, lack the taste of cruelty. It becomes the inevitable result of wrong choices repeated again and again. The depth is here. Justice does not rush to destroy. It is patient enough to be mistaken for weakness. But when the decisive moment comes, it does not hesitate. Because delaying further would mean paying with the lives of those who cannot defend themselves. Justice, by its nature, protects principles, but it also protects people from limitless cruelty. That is why this three-step path is not only a pattern for one confrontation, it is a principle for any society that wants to survive. A society that does not know how to invite quickly becomes authoritarian. A society that does not know how to warn becomes naive. And a society that refuses to punish when necessary hands its fate to the most brutal person in the room. The balance is knowing when to speak, when to pause, and when to act decisively. At this point, the story rises beyond a single clash. It becomes a reminder for every era. Justice is not weakness wearing a gentle mask, and it is not violence wearing a holy costume. Justice is a narrow path where every step must be weighed by conscience and responsibility. And when that path is walked completely, even the defeated cannot deny they faced not revenge, but the natural consequence of the choice they stubbornly pursued. There is a common misunderstanding about strength. People often think victory is measured only by how many enemies are crushed. But in a higher moral order, real victory does not end when the opponent falls. It begins when the opponent no longer wants to stand back up as an enemy. That is where the line between violence and true strength finally becomes visible. Violence forces silence. Moral strength produces voluntary change. After brutal clashes, what remains is not the sound of blades, but a quiet confrontation between the winner and the defeated. In that space, there is no more taunting, no more arrogance feeding violence. There is only the question every defeated person must ask: where did my path actually lead? And in that bare moment, the greatest strength is not in the arm. It is in how the victor chooses to respond. If the only purpose of strength is destruction, then every conflict ends the same way. One side lives, one side dies, and the cycle of hatred continues to be handed down. But if the purpose of strength is restoring order, then victory is only complete when that order takes root inside the hearts of those who once opposed it. Because someone forced into submission remains a seed of future violence. Only someone transformed becomes the foundation of lasting peace. This is not only true of unseen beings who once lived by violence, it is true of human beings too. Some arrive with clear ambition, carrying plans, rewards, and promises drawn by greed. They believe strength is only physical dominance, and that the winner takes everything. But when they face someone who is not provoked by challenge, not shaken by gain, and not trying to prove anything about himself, they begin to feel how empty their goals really are. Transformation does not happen through long speeches. It happens through small, consistent choices. Restraint when you could easily strike. Calmness in the face of provocation. Asking the right question instead of throwing the final blow. Those actions can look weak, but they become the clearest mirror for the person across from you. They begin to realize they are facing a kind of strength they have never met before. Strength that does not need threats to earn respect. In that moment, failure stops being the most frightening thing. What becomes more frightening is realizing every motive that once drove you is small next to a higher moral standard. And when that realization lands, submission no longer looks like fear. It looks like respect. The defeated does not bow because he was crushed. He bows because he has seen a different path for himself. This same principle appears inside the world of law, where power most easily twists truth. Justice rises above status. And when the one with authority accepts standing before judgment like an ordinary person, something rare happens. Trust is restored. The witnesses no longer see force being imposed. They see integrity. And that integrity persuades more strongly than any punishment. Because fair law enforcement does not only settle one dispute, it sends a quiet but deep message. In this order, no one is allowed to stand above truth. When people feel that message, even outsiders begin adjusting their behavior. Not because they fear punishment, but because they do not want to stand on the wrong side in a society where justice is guarded carefully. Strength like this does not create obedient subjects. It creates responsible people. It does not multiply fear. It plants self-examination inside each person. And self-examination is the strongest foundation for peace. A society is truly safe only when people choose what is right, even when no one is watching. Here, victory is redefined. Victory is no longer the end of a clash. It is the beginning of a new order. An order where the one who once spread violence is given a chance to become a guardian of peace, where the one who lived by physical dominance learns to honor moral strength, and where justice is not only imposed from the outside but accepted from the inside. That is real power, not only silencing an enemy but removing the reason they ever wanted to resist in the first place. When the story closes, what lingers is not the sound of conflict but a quiet question for everyone listening. What do we believe strength is, and how are we using it? Every era has strong people, but not every era has people disciplined enough to place strength under the control of justice. And that difference decides whether a society moves toward light or keeps sinking into the spiral of fear. This story leaves behind an unavoidable principle. Power, when it is not bound by law and morality, becomes violent sooner or later. But law, without people willing to bow before that same law, is only empty words. Justice only lives when the strongest person accepts standing level with the weakest person before judgment. In that moment, order no longer rests on fear, it rests on trust. What makes justice worthy of respect is not harshness. It is consistency. When someone can win in confrontation but is still willing to lose in court when there is no evidence, justice is not only enforced, it is proven. Witnesses realize this is not the justice of the winner, it is the justice of truth. And that truth shakes hardened hearts more than any punishment ever could. From there, a deeper lesson becomes clear. Justice does not shrink people. It makes them stand straighter. It forces the arrogant to look down into themselves. It forces the weak to believe they have not been abandoned. And it forces those in authority to remember that every decision leaves a mark, not only in history, but in the conscience of the community. A society that guards justice like this does not need endless rules because people regulate themselves when they know no one stands above truth. The story also reminds us that transformation is always stronger than destruction. Someone destroyed disappears, but someone transformed becomes a living witness to the power of justice. When a person changes voluntarily, they carry the memory of the old path as a warning, and the new path as a promise. No peace is more durable than peace built on the willing abandonment of violence. Step back, and you will see that every era has its own deep well. It might be a region where injustice continues, a system where the weak are crushed in silence, or a blind spot where people shrug and say, "That is just how it is." But that sentence is a sign that justice is being pushed back. Because when people grow used to injustice, evil no longer needs to hide, it only needs to keep existing. The final message of this story is not to glorify the past. It is to illuminate the present. It asks us, if justice must be defended, who will carry that responsibility? Not with rage, not with ego, but with humility and inner discipline. Because the greatest power is not the ability to impose, but the ability to limit yourself when you have every ability to do the opposite. When a community learns to respect justice more than strength, it no longer needs rulers who govern by fear. When leaders understand their position is responsibility, not privilege, they act differently, speak differently, and leave a different legacy. A legacy of trust, not obsession. And maybe this is the most important thing the story leaves behind. A just world is not built by perfect people, but by people who bow to what is right. When justice becomes the shared standard, the strong no longer need to prove strength, and the weak no longer need to live in fear. In that place, peace is not forced silence. It is agreement grown from within each person. That is not a dramatic ending. It is a durable reminder that justice, when protected, can transform even those who once lived in darkness, and that the greatest responsibility of every generation is not to gather more strength, but to learn how to use strength so the world is more just after we are gone. From there, the lesson for our lives today becomes very clear. First, every person holds a kind of power, whether large or small. The power of words, the power of position, the power of knowledge, or simply the power to influence the people around you. The question is not how strong we are. The question is what we use that power for. When we face wrongdoing, do we choose silence out of fear, or do we act with clarity and responsibility? Second, justice in daily life is not always about big, dramatic choices. Sometimes it begins with fairness, with refusing favoritism, with admitting you were wrong even when you have enough authority to deny it, with protecting someone weaker even when it brings no immediate benefit. Each small action repeated creates an environment where evil cannot easily take root. Finally, the story reminds us that lasting peace does not come from force. It comes from agreement built on trust. When people believe justice exists, they do not need violence to protect themselves. And when that trust spreads, society becomes safer not because it has more power, but because fewer people want to do what is wrong. If these lessons feel meaningful to you, and if you want to keep exploring spiritual history with depth, stories that help us understand justice, authority, and human responsibility across the ages, join the Prophetic History Explained community so we can keep learning together about the prophets, historical figures, and timeless messages that still speak to the modern world. And do not forget to subscribe to support us so we can keep bringing you deeper, more valuable, and more thought-provoking videos in the future. Ulta.